Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
This is Book 3 of the Wolfman Chronicles, Chapter 10. The Werewolf's Revenge, Montana and North Dakota. The she-wolf speaks. As the moon begins to wane and the first lights of dawn filter through the trees, I find comfort in the soft warmth of the barn. Here, nestled with these two young dogs that have become my daily companions, I can finally allow myself a moment of respite. With a weary sigh, I lower myself to the soft earth, my body relaxing as the tension of the night begins to ebb away. The cool morning breeze carries the scent of hay and earth and barn smells, a comforting embrace that soothes my restless spirit. I close my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun's rays coming through the window. In this tranquil sanctuary, I can finally let my guard down. Here, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the animals, I feel safe and at peace, knowing that for now I'm free from the relentless pursuit of those who would seek to capture me or destroy me. I think of Jack, of the anger and the rage I witnessed as I ran after him, and grateful for the calming effect I had on him when he finally saw me. If only I could bring him peace. It was a cold, brisk morning. Jack woke refreshed from his deep sleep. He still felt the rage deep inside him, but it felt comfortable now. He walked downstairs and he could hear Miguel in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. He poured himself a cup and he sat down at the table across from Miguel. "How are you feeling this morning?" Miguel asked. "Oh, I'm better, thanks. Now, what was it you wanted to tell me last night?" Miguel took a big sip of his coffee, then he relayed Bill Riley's message. "Riley called a couple times yesterday. Buck Brady's body was found in a small lake in Glacier Park, but his truck was gone. They found it in Fargo, North Dakota. Apparently, someone that worked for the Park Service hid his own car near the lake and took the truck. Buck's body was mauled by a bear, but they don't know if that was the cause of death. They think he was trying to cross into Canada. He had a load of drugs on him. Let's see, what else?" Miguel took another drink of his coffee while he thought back to Riley's phone calls. "Oh yeah, whoever is driving the truck stole some plates off another vehicle in Williston and then headed to Fargo where he's trying to sell the dope. It caught the attention of an undercover DEA agent who's been responsible for getting all this info for us. He was able to take photos of the truck registration. It was registered to a Chase Whitmore, of course. And he also got a photo of a large duffel bag in the back seat full of packages of what appeared to be cocaine. Now there's also a bag full of money." Jack looked down into his coffee cup. "Well, that answers why Buck was leaving town so quickly. He tried to frame me and left town with the money and the drugs. And just like we thought, it's only a matter of time before the cartel comes looking for their missing dope and money." He felt the bristling of his neck hairs and his lips quivered slightly, as if in a snarl. He took another big gulp of coffee and a deep breath. He had to hold it together for now. "Yeah, I have no doubt they'll show up eventually. I don't know what's taken them so long. I would have assumed they'd have been here by now," Miguel replied. "Me too," says Jack, "and I'm kind of looking forward to it." Bill Riley had arrived home in the middle of the night and gone straight to bed. He woke early, anxious to get to the office. He checked his phone for messages. There was one from the sheriff in Kalispell. No details, just a simple "call me." He poured himself a cup of coffee, then phoned the sheriff's personal number. "Good morning, Bill. I just wanted to give you an update. The Fargo PD has located the suspect's white pickup parked behind an apartment building downtown. They've got several cars in position waiting for the suspect to come out of the apartment building. They're going to let him get in his truck and then pull him over for expired tags. Fortunately, whoever they stole the plates from hadn't put their new registration sticker on yet, he chuckled. Well, that's great news. He's probably armed. I'm sure Sheriff Brady had plenty of guns in the truck. Yeah, they're aware of that. That DEA agent that poked around in the truck yesterday, he saw one in the glove box and another one under the driver's seat. And I'll let you know when I hear any developments. Well, thanks. I'm heading into the office now anyway. I'll check the scanners and call Fargo PD as well. Nice working with you, Bill replied. Dakota and Cricket had slept on a blow-up mattress in Sparrow's living room. He had thought about getting a hotel room at some point last night, but it was just too stoned to act on the thought. Now, Sparrow couldn't get out of his shift at work, so he'd left around 7 p.m. to walk to the pub. Dakota and Cricket had crashed. He didn't even remember hearing Sparrow get in last night. Well, he got up, and he stumbled to the bathroom, and he looked at his sleepy, unshaven face in the mirror, and he grinned. He had drugs, he had money, a new girl, and a cool pickup. It doesn't get much better than this, he decided. Stumbling back into the living room, he laid back down next to Cricket and fell back asleep. Well, it was mid-morning before he woke up again, becoming aware that Cricket was still laying in the same position he had seen her in earlier, with her back to him. He touched her shoulder and brushed her hair away from her face. With a jerk reaction, he shot up in bed and pulled her over onto her back. She was not breathing. He shook her, trying to get her to wake up, but she was unresponsive. "Oh, God," Dakota cried out. "Cricket, wake up," he yelled. He jumped up, looking for his phone in this mess of beer bottles and pizza boxes, plates, and there was even cocaine spilled on the table. He felt the seat cushions of the sofa, looked on the floor in his pockets. They were both still fully dressed. Frantically, he glanced all around the room, looking for his phone, or hers. Neither were in sight. He burst open Sparrow's bedroom door. The bed was empty. He was beginning to panic now. He made another quick check around the living room. His phone and his keys were gone. He went over to Cricket again, shaking and slapping her cheeks. He tried to remember how to do CPR and realized he had no idea. He tried to blow his breath into her mouth, trying to remember how they did it on TV. "Oh, my God," he cried out again. Tears were welling up in his eyes. He opened the door and yelled, "Help!" into the hallway of the apartment building. He banged on the nearest door in the hall. There was no answer. He went to the next and the next until a door finally opened and a woman answered. "Call 911. My girlfriend isn't breathing," he yelled. The woman looked at him, confused for a moment, then ran to get her cell phone. She dialed 911 and relayed her address to the dispatcher, then went back to the apartment with Dakota to check on Cricket and wait for emergency services to arrive. It was only moments later that police officers came down the hallway, hands on their holsters. Medics arrived shortly after. Cricket was immediately given oxygen and loaded onto a stretcher. Dakota was escorted through the hallway in handcuffs. Sal Flores arrived shortly after Dakota was hauled away in a police car and the ambulance had left for the hospital. He stood next to that white pickup truck talking to an officer about the morning's events. Another 2 officers were upstairs in Sparrow's apartment searching for the truck keys. They radioed down, "No sign of the keys. We'll need to secure this apartment. There's an open bag of cocaine on the coffee table." Sal pulled out the same tool he'd used the day before to open the truck's door lock. "Let me see that," the officer said. "Why don't we have one of those?" He showed the other officers that handy little tool that Sal carried in his pocket. Sal shrugged his shoulders and opened the door. He reached into the back and pulled back the blanket covering the duffel bags. Only there were no bags. The drugs and the money were gone. Sal looked up at the officers. "It was here yesterday. Someone's been in this truck." Sparrow was already halfway to Canada. Steve Oswald was having lunch with his wife when his phone rang. "Hello, any word on Dakota?" he asked into the phone. "Well, you're going to need to fly over to Fargo today. He's been picked up. He'll be booked into the county jail this afternoon. His girlfriend, she's in critical condition at the Sanford Medical Center, apparent overdose. They've impounded the truck, but the drugs and the money and the guns that were seen in the vehicle yesterday by the DEA agent, well, they're all missing. There is no sign of break-in, and the keys to the truck are missing. At this point, they're assuming the person they were staying with, the one whose apartment they were in, that's the suspect. They think he stole the keys and then stole the items out of the truck sometime before 3:15 a.m. That's when the Fargo PD spotted the truck in the parking lot behind the apartment building. Now, they've had officers watching that truck since then." Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave right away. Do you know what the holding charges are?" "Yeah, drug possession's all they can book him on. There was a bag of cocaine at the apartment. If the girl doesn't make it, then he'll be charged with involuntary manslaughter. We know he stole the truck, but there's no charges on that yet. You should be able to get him released into your custody and brought back here, but he's still facing jail time since he was on probation. I realize you have a soft spot for this kid, but he's heading down the rabbit hole." "Yeah, damn it. I really had hopes for this one. I had hoped I'd head into retirement with a success story, not a failure," he replied. "Sometimes you just can't get through to these kids," the sheriff remarked. "Well, I'll be in touch." Oswald looked at his wife and shook his head. She got up and walked over to the side of the table and held his head against her chest. "I'm sorry, honey." He sighed. "I'll be back in a couple of days," and he went upstairs to pack his bags. Julian didn't know that Catherine had been standing outside his door the previous evening, listening to his conversation with Miguel. She had been worried about her brother, but now she was frantic. He also didn't know that she had stormed into her bedroom, packed her bags, and loaded them into the truck. He did, however, know that she and Usko were arguing again. He woke in the morning and reached over for Juanita, realizing that she was already out of bed. The constant arguing between Usko and Catherine had been getting to her as well. Well, he walked down to the kitchen for a cup of coffee, and he found the three of them sitting at the large table in the dining room. Juanita looked up at Julian and motioned for him to sit beside her. "Julian," she said firmly, "Catherine is insisting on flying to Montana. Usko is trying to keep her here. I'm sick to death of trying to talk sense into these two brats, so I'm putting my foot down. You will all do as I say." Catherine tried to butt in, but Juanita quickly stopped her. "Here's the facts. We all know Jack is in danger, but he's got Miguel with him, and I doubt there's anything that those two can't handle. And we all know Julian can't take the risk of flying on an international flight. He's a wanted man, especially in the United States. This idiot over here has a passport that's expired." She glared at Usko for a moment with a look that made him shrivel. "And Catherine here is pregnant." Now, this latest news surprised Julian. He had not yet been told about this new development. He looked at Catherine with a surprised look on his face. Juanita continued, "Now, here's what we're going to do. Everyone is just going to cool down for a few days. I'm going to create a quick business called the Spirit Wolf Sanctuary under the guise of transporting wolves from Mexico into the United States. Julian and Usko will travel as wolves, leashed, in cages." She glared at both Julian and Usko to make sure they wouldn't open their mouths to complain. "Catherine and I will pose as trainers. I will create a logo, make us both official uniform shirts to wear, create the official documentation we'll need to transport these wild animals." Again, she glared at both the men. "And anything else we might need. Now, I want you all to give me a few days to get these things together. Meanwhile, Julian, I want you to let Miguel know our plans. He can decide when to tell Jack." She stopped for a moment. She looked directly at Catherine. "I won't allow you to interrupt this mission, nor will I allow you to put yourself, your baby, or the rest of us in danger. You'll do as I say, or I'll tie you up and leave you in a stall with the horses. Do I make myself clear?" Julian smiled. When Juanita put her foot down, no one was willing to contradict her. Well, Dakota sat in the booking room, his head in his hands. He couldn't believe he was heading back to jail. He'd come so close to living the life of his dreams. He thought back to the previous day, all the coke they'd snorted. They hadn't paid any attention to how much Cricket was inhaling, or how much weed she'd smoked, or that he hadn't seen her eat any of the pizza. She was a little thing, barely 100 pounds. Why hadn't he been more responsible and watched her more closely? Told her she'd had enough. And if she died, he paused, trying to stop himself from thinking of that. But if she did, I'll be responsible for her death. They'll put me away for a long time. He stood up and yelled the F word as loud as he could and hit the cement wall with his fist, then crumpled back onto the bench, holding his hand in pain. It was then that the tears came, and once they started, they weren't going to stop. Sparrow drove a small red Honda Civic. It was over 10 years old, dented and scratched in quite a few places. He would have liked to have taken Dakota's truck. Hell, with this much money, he could buy a new truck. Once he got to Canada and met his buddy who was waiting for him, he'd do just that. He'd head over to the nearest dealership and pay cash for a brand new truck. He wondered if Dakota had woken up yet and realized his truck was empty. He'll be so mad, Sparrow laughed. Well, one man's loss is another man's gain, he thought to himself. There was nothing he left behind in the apartment that he wanted. He had no reason to go back there. He'd head into Canada, offload all this dope to his friend, and walk away with a boatload full of cash. Then he'd head to Alaska. That had always been his dream. A nice log home and some land, live off-grid. He smiled at the thought that his dream would now become a reality. 100 different scenarios had crossed Sparrow's mind in the short time since Dakota had arrived. Should he ask to be cut in on the deal with Dakota, partner up with him? In the end, he had just decided to take it all. He was sure Dakota would have done the same to him. The plan was to drive over the border at a location that he knew never had any border patrol watching it. It was rural and up a dirt road with farms on either side. Then he would meet up with his friend, a man who went by the name Ringo, who was living in Manitoba. Sparrow had bought weed from him many times in the past. He had some good connections, and when Sparrow had called him yesterday afternoon, he was anxious to get his hands on that cocaine. Now, what Sparrow didn't know was that Ringo had recently gotten himself into a bit of a bind. He had sold some illicit drugs to an undercover officer, and he was arrested. He was now on supervised parole and facing a prison sentence, unless he could supply the DEA with the names of his suppliers. He knew that if he snitched, he'd be dead within hours. But then, out of the blue, Sparrow called. In a lucky set of circumstances, he now had a name he could provide his parole officer. Steve Oswald was escorted to the booking room where they were holding Dakota. That kid looks truly miserable, Oswald thought to himself as he walked into the room. Seeing Dakota slumped in his chair. He'd been in this room for hours now with only a glass of water and some crackers to eat on. Oswald handed him a bag of Burger King takeout, a hamburger, fries, and a soda, and Dakota was grateful. So tell me the whole story. How'd you get here? How'd you get the truck? And what happened back at Glacier, at the lake? Dakota looked up from his burger. You know about that? Well, I need you to fill in the details. Dakota shoved several French fries into his mouth. I was doing my rounds when I saw an abandoned truck. I know it was stupid, but I decided to go back later and ditch my car and take the truck. Oswald gave him a moment to continue. When he didn't, he asked, "And?" And that's it, Dakota replied. Damn it, Dakota. Do you realize how much trouble you're in? You can tell me what happened, or you can tell them. One way or another, this whole story's coming out. I think you'd better start with me. I'm the one who can get you a lawyer. Dakota took a deep breath. I took the truck. It was abandoned. I didn't figure anybody would care. Then I drove to Wolf Point and picked up a girl, Cricket. How is she? No one will tell me anything. She's in critical condition, in a coma. Now tell me about the truck. Whose is it? Dakota still danced around the question. He wasn't aware that the body had been found or that anyone even knew about a body. And he didn't want to say anything incriminating, see? Dakota, I'm giving you one more chance to tell me the truth. I want to know who that truck belonged to, and I want to know how he ended up in that lake. Dakota gulped. Shit, you guys know about the guy in the lake? Oswald hesitated. Yes, Dakota, the body has been found. Now you better come clean or you're going to be charged with murder. I didn't kill him. I found him and he was already dead. He'd been hurt pretty bad by a bear. I didn't see the bear, but I saw the blood and I knew he's dead. I didn't have my radio on me, so I went back to get it. But then I seen his truck and I decided to look in it for some identification so I could radio it in. And that's when I saw the bags of coke and money and I figured he was a drug dealer. So I dumped his body in the lake and I took his truck. But I didn't kill him, I swear. So who's the girl? She's just a girl that I picked up in Wolf Point at the casino. Her dad works there. Her name's Cricket. And where are the drugs now? Oswald asked. In the truck. They're in the back seat under a blanket. Okay, Dakota, I'll get you a public defender and we'll see if they'll release you into my custody, but I can't promise anything. A lot depends on if that poor girl lives or not. Well, Deputy Bill Riley parked in his truck in front of Jack's house. Two men stepped out of the vehicle, and Jack met him at the door. Jack Moore, this is FBI Special Agent Mark Grant. We'd like to talk with you. He gave Jack a quick look to assure him it was okay, even though that introduction sounded very official. Jack invited him into the living room, and Miguel came out of the kitchen and joined him. Now, this is my friend Miguel. He's staying out here at the ranch, and I'd like him to join us. Special Agent Grant reached out his hand to shake Miguel's, and the four men sat down to talk. First of all, Jack, I want you to know that we've been investigating the illegal transporting of drugs into the United States through your ranch for several months now, nearly a year. And I'm sorry about the death of your men. We were in touch with your ranch manager, Angus Smith, and we know all about the C Cattle Company. We're dealing with some major players here, and we need your cooperation. My cooperation? Asked Jack. Angus had his men putting tracking devices on every one of those bags of cocaine that left your ranch. We need to know where that cocaine was headed. All we know right now is that the cows were trucked to a processing plant, and the drugs were picked up in unmarked white delivery vans and headed for Chicago. We know who's behind this, but we need to know who it's being delivered to in the U.S. We know it's not just being distributed out on the streets. These drugs are being warehoused by the cartel right here in the U.S., then either sold to dealers or transported to other countries. So what do you need me to do? Well, we know Sheriff Buck Brady took a good portion of that last shipment with him. The tracking devices have followed it from here north to Glacier and then east to North Dakota. Right now, it's headed north again towards Canada. Now, we're prepared to stop that transportation at the border before it reaches Canada. Once we have it in our possession, we'll bring it back here. We also know that the Colombian cartel knows that a good portion of that last shipment was missing, along with the money. And we also interpreted several phone messages between Sheriff Buck Brady and the C Cattle Company in Colombia. He blamed the missing drugs and money on Angus, which is what got your men killed. But before he left town, he told them that he had discovered that you had it. Now, I have an idea why they haven't shown up here yet, but we think it's because they wanted some time to pass before coming back to the scene of their last killing frenzy. We feel pretty certain that they're going to eventually show up here. We want you to encourage that action by spreading some money around town. Buy yourself a brand new pickup truck. Make it obvious that you're back and you're loaded. We have a couple of dealers under our supervision that'll spread the word that you're their supplier. Word will get out fast and that'll bring them a running. In other words, We're dangling a carrot and bringing them out of hiding. And once they do come, do I have the authority to protect myself? Jack, you're under federal protection. If you or Miguel need to defend yourself, you have every right, the agent replied. Sparrow was nearly to the Canadian border when he saw the dust of a car approaching him from behind. He glanced in his rearview mirror, surprised to see another vehicle on this farm road, especially one going fast enough to make dust. Now, there was plenty of farm trucks and tractors, but they weren't in a hurry. This car was approaching fast. In a few moments, that car was upon him, and the red and the blue lights began to flash. Crap, he exclaimed, and put his foot on the gas. He thought if he could make it to the Canadian border, he'd be out of jurisdiction and this cop would have to let him go. He knew he was very near the border. Suddenly, he felt a huge jolt and his car came to a sudden stop. The officer behind him had used the grappler, a device that is used to stop fleeing vehicles with the intent of avoiding pursuits and crashes. It unfolds a net from the officer's bumper, which is then nudged into a tire, wrapping around it, creating a tether and bringing the car to a halt. Within minutes, 2 more law enforcement vehicles came from the opposite direction, and Sparrow found himself surrounded. He was told to step out of the car, hands above his head, kneel, and then lay on the ground. Handcuffed, he watched as the officers pulled the duffel bags from the back seat and loaded them into the trunk of one of the cars. So close, he thought to himself. So damn close.